So it's good to be here, and I'm going to talk today about, I'm going to title this Proofs of God. Proofs of God. And I know you guys have probably heard sermons before on proving that there's a God. You can find information within the Bible. You can find information within science, within nature. Just thinking about whether there is or is not a God, I'm sure you can all come up with some ideas around that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And as a lead into that, I just want to tell you about a recent survey that was conducted. I think it was conducted by the Pew Survey Organization. And I think this is going back to last year this survey was conducted, looking at just belief in God in the United States. And they've done a number of these surveys over the years. And the previous one, the last year, I believe, was 2010. And in 2010, they had about 78% of the people in the United States were saying they believed in God. Now, they didn't specifically define God as we understand God, so just understand that. But about 78% believed in God. And then when they conducted that poll 4 years later, last year, it was down to 74% said that they believed in God. And they were looking at the statistics, and they were showing that some of the bigger churches, like the Catholic Church, some of the mainline Baptist churches, that they saw some drop-off. Some of the more old-time, old-school Protestant churches had seen a drop-off in belief and in membership within their organizations. And what they saw was that some of the increases of where were these people now were in agnosticism, in atheism. They came up. They're still kind of low, but they were rising, all right? In new religions in this country like Hinduism and Islam, they were rising a little bit. Again, they're still small compared to the rest of the population, but when you think about dropping 4 percentage points in about 4 years on just the main belief in God, to me that was kind of dramatic. And when you look at some of the social issues that have changed over the last 5 to 10 years in this country, it's not that surprising when you begin to think about this. So interesting details out there as far as the direction this country is going in its belief and its thinking on just the general topic of God. And when I was a kid, I can remember that I don't know if I met an atheist until I got to be maybe 12, 13, 14 years old. When I was a little kid running around in grade school, I don't remember any of the kids who didn't believe in God. But an interesting story, my daughter, about 2 years ago, was playing next door, so we would take her over to play with the next door neighbor girl, and they'd sometimes bring her over, and we'd take the kid back, you know, when they were playing with each other. And my daughter came back from playing with the next door neighbor, and we were talking about, you know, saying your prayers tonight and, you know, getting into that. And my daughter was saying, well, is there a God? And I said, well, what do you mean, is there a God? Because I had been talking to my daughter since she was, you know, able to understand that there's a God and we're going to pray to God and all that sort of thing. And I said, why do you say that? And she said, well, I'm not going to name any names. So-and-so said there's no God. So they had gotten into a conversation, her and the next door neighbor girl who's about a year older than her. So my daughter's 7 now, so this girl's about 8, but she was younger at the time. So she was probably maybe 6 at the time. And she was telling my daughter that I don't believe in God, there's no God, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was kind of like taken aback by that, you know, thinking about my childhood and how I was raised and the kids that I knew and the neighborhood I was in. And I realized it's a different world out there. It's a different world, and it's continuing to get different each and every day, more dramatically. So I think that it's important to talk about this topic we're going to discuss today, which is proofs of God. You know, why do we believe in God? Well, you know, my mother was hammering that into my mind as a young kid. That might have something to do with it. But when you start to look around at things and do some research and study things, you will find that just in general terms, if you don't believe there's a God, something I feel is not logical with you. And I'm going to explain why I say that today as we begin to talk about this topic. So the first area I want to go into here is just from the Bible. Now, if you talk to agnostics and atheists, they would argue with me right off the bat, well, how can you argue the Bible to me when I don't believe the Bible? So I totally get that. We're going to get into some scientific aspects of believing in God a little bit later, but I'm going to hopefully make some sense, even if some agnostics or atheists listen to this message, about why the Bible actually has some support for the idea that there is a God. Now, one example I want to take, and you guys have probably heard this type of thing before, so it's going to be a little bit of a review for you. Let's turn over to Genesis chapter 6 for a moment, and I want to read some scriptures over there. Genesis chapter 6, and I'm going to pick it up in verse 12, and let me begin reading Genesis chapter 6, verse 12. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. So you guys know about what's going to happen here. We can go over to chapter 7 of Genesis. I'm not going to read the entire chapter, but we begin to read in chapter 7, verse 1 of Genesis. And the Lord said unto Noah, come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. And then he goes on to talk about, take these beasts, we're going to put them on the ark, I'm going to save you and your family. And we get the story of the flood. So the story of the flood. What's interesting about the story of the flood, which a lot of people don't believe. A lot of people say, oh, that's just a story. How do you believe those stories in Genesis? Those are like fairy tales. It's like Jack and the Beanstalk. How can you believe that kind of thing? Well, here's why you can believe that kind of thing. If you study various cultures throughout the world, okay, and I'm not just talking about cultures that are based near the sea. You would think that maybe the Japanese have a flood story. You would think that maybe in the Philippines there's a flood story. In those nations that are island nations, because they're so connected to the ocean. And you would find stories like that within those cultures, but you even find flood stories in central Mexico. You even find flood stories in places in Central Asia that are many, many miles from any ocean. And you have to ask yourself a question. Why would these people be making up a story relating to a flood when they don't see any ocean around them or large bodies of water? Does that make logical sense? To me, it doesn't. It doesn't when you think about these stories that come from pagan religion and how they're put together. If you read these stories, there's connection to what makes sense for these people as far as how they're viewing the circumstances around them. But in places like Central Asia, Central Mexico, there is a flood story. And what's funny about these flood stories is they're not exactly the same. And that makes sense because once one person gets a story and passes it on to somebody else, of course it's going to change. That's how it works when you tell somebody a story. They're not exactly the same, but they are similar in this sense that a certain family survives and continues to populate the world. So I find that very striking, very interesting when you look around at various cultures of the world besides just looking in the Bible on that particular story. Another example of biblical evidence for God. When you study the Bible, a couple hundred years ago, people began to criticize the Bible. A lot of people who felt that they were intelligent and smart began to look at the Bible and stories in the Bible and say, hey, we don't have evidence of this. We don't have evidence that this happened in that particular culture. We don't have evidence that this particular Greek word was used in that way by people who were living in that Greek city. And you'll find, various bits of information like that as higher criticism began to look at the Bible. But over the last 200 years up to today, what you find is that a lot of those critiques of the Bible that were made when all of this kind of thing started, many of them have been answered through archaeology, and they found that this information that they were criticizing in the Bible was actually true. I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a term in the Bible, a Greek word, it's called polytarchis. Polytarchis, and it's in reference to city rulers in the city of Thessalonica. So there was a time when we had not found any inscription using that Greek term in that particular city of Greece. Let's find this over in Acts chapter 17, just so we can see what I'm talking about here. Acts chapter 17. And I'm going to pick it up there in verse 6, and we'll also read verse 8. Acts 17, verse 6. And when they found them not, they drew Jason and certain brethren unto the rulers of the city. So that's in Greek, polytarchis, okay? Polytarchis, the rulers of the city, crying, these that have turned the world upside down are come hither also. And then drop down to verse 8. And they troubled the people and the rulers of the city, the polytarchis, when they heard these things. Now, a couple hundred years ago, they had done some excavations. They had some archaeological information. And they hadn't found any information where this particular phrase was used for rulers of this particular city. But since that time, they found 19 inscriptions, 5 specifically from Thessalonica, that use that particular terminology in reference to rulers of the city. Another example on similar grounds like that can be found over in Acts 13 and verse 7. Acts 13 and verse 7. I'm going to read this to you. Acts 13, 7. Which was with the deputy of the country, Sergius Paulus, a prudent man, who called for Barnabas and Saul, and desired to hear the word of God. So this is getting real specific about the person who was the deputy of this particular country. His name was Sergius Paulus. Once again, was this individual, if you read further, this guy was the governor of Cyprus at this particular time of the writing. He was known as the proconsul of that particular location. Once again, the critics said that we don't have any records of this particular individual being the proconsul of Cyprus. And once again, after that criticism had come, years later, they did find an inscription on the Isle of Cyprus that a guy named Paulus was the proconsul. So again, I can cite numerous examples like this. I'm not going to cite them all up here today, but they are out there. If this is something you want to do research on, if this is something you think will have an effect on somebody you know, that the Bible is solid history. It is solid history, and that helps us in defending the Bible against other religious books that are out there. Because people will say, well, all those religions have different books. If you're a Hindu, you've got the Bhagavad Gita. And I've got the Bhagavad Gita at home. And when you read the Bhagavad Gita, folks, it's like reading something my daughter watches on cartoons, okay? I'm serious. There's a difference when you read the Bhagavad Gita and you read the Bible. You will see that difference. It will become plain to you as you're reading the one holy book as opposed to this holy book. The same thing is true of other books, whether it's the Book of Mormon versus the Bible, or the Quran and the Bible. And I've read the entire Quran, and you will see a difference. The Quran tries to make itself like the Bible in some respects, but it is very different. The writing is very different. And you start to say to yourself, wow, this is not concise. This is not clicking like when you read the Bible, when you look at this and compare the various holy books that are out there. Well, let me give you another example from the Bible. Now, we've all heard about prophecy, and of course, when we bring up the example of prophecy and say that the Bible has fulfilled prophecy, critics will argue against us. Now, to give you an example, I think I've talked about the book of Daniel here before, where some believe, like we do, that Daniel was written when Daniel was in Babylonian captivity, and this prophecy about these kingdoms that were going to come on the world, well, only the first kingdom was there, the Babylonian one. The ones that were to follow were not there yet, but he specifically gives you details within that prophecy that leave it with no doubt that those next three kingdoms are understood in that prophecy. So if you're writing that when the first one is on the earth, and you look forward, you got to say, well, wait a minute, he saw these kingdoms that were going to be on the earth. But the critics say, no. They say, no, that was written many years later, after the first, the second, and then the third kingdom was upon the earth. Because they say it was written maybe in the 100s, the critics, rather than the 500s BC. But wait a second. What about that fourth kingdom? What about that fourth kingdom, the Roman kingdom? They say the 100s, the Roman kingdom wasn't really doing its thing yet when you get into the 100s BC. And they kind of poo-poo that aspect of it, okay? So that's one thing you can throw at them. But another thing is this. Let's take a look at Jeremiah 51 for a minute. Jeremiah 51, verse 37. And if you do read any commentaries that compare the evidence for Daniel being written in the 500s BC versus the 100s BC, and I've read the evidence on both sides. I've read the liberal scholars in the Bible who say it was written much later than the conservative scholars who say no, it was written during the Babylonian time. The evidence in my mind is all on the side of the older writing, the more conservative writing. When you look at this evidence side by side, you just look at some of the things that the liberal scholars say, and you're just like, that is a reason to you? You're putting support with that? In comparison to the other side. It's dramatic, in my mind at least. It's dramatic, and I'll admit I may be biased, but I'm trying to look at this in an equal way. I don't have time to get into all that today, but that's something you guys may do, and you'll see that. But in Jeremiah 51 and verse 37, Jeremiah 51:37, and Babylon shall become heaps, a dwelling place for dragons, an astonishment and a hissing, without an inhabitant. Babylon, the ancient city of Babylon, which at this time was still kicking. It was still there, okay? But we know today that the ancient city of Babylon is not there. And it hasn't been there since about the 1st century BC, okay? So this ancient city, Babylon, has been left as a heap. No inhabitants are there. It's never been rebuilt. Saddam Hussein was talking about trying to rebuild the city of Babylon. Okay, that was one of the things on his agenda. He never was able to do that, though. So when you go to Iraq today, the ancient area of Babylon, there's no city there. Okay? And it has been that way for years and years. And Jeremiah's prophecy is saying that one day Babylon would be nothing at a time when it was something. It was a big deal. Now notice this. There's some other scriptures that say this. Isaiah 13, 20 verses 22. Isaiah 13, let's take a look at that. This is about Babylon also. Isaiah 13 verses 20 through 22. And again, it's verse 19 will let you know it's speaking about Babylon. And verse 20, it shall never be inhabited, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation, neither shall the Arabian pitch tent there, neither shall the shepherds make their fold there, but wild beasts of the desert shall lie there, and their houses shall be full of doleful creatures, and owls shall dwell there, and satyrs shall dance there. So again, this is speaking of Babylon. Babylon eventually was going to become nothing and not inhabited. That was the prophecy about Babylon. You can move over to Isaiah 14, verses 22 to 23. It continues to talk about Babylon. Saith the Lord of hosts, breaking in, verse 22, and cut off from Babylon the name and remnant and son and nephew, saith the Lord. I will also make it a possession for the bittern and pools of water, and I will sweep it with the besom of destruction, saith the Lord of hosts. Reading from the King James here. Okay, so prophecy is saying Babylon is going to be utterly destroyed and will not have an inhabitant after the time it's destroyed. So we know Babylon has been destroyed. We know Babylon does not have inhabitants today. Okay? Now the critics could say, well, this could have been written at a time after Babylon was destroyed. Okay? Now, most conservatives say Isaiah is written way before that. Jeremiah is written way before that, and there's good evidence for that. But here's another bit of evidence. Okay? The Septuagint version of the Bible, okay, the Septuagint version, the Greek Old Testament, was written around the 200s BC. We actually have some copies of this, okay? And we can find these prophecies in there in the 200s BC. You get what I'm saying here? So even if you don't take the idea that Isaiah was written maybe in the 700s BC, if you don't take the idea that Jeremiah is written back around that time, 500s, 600s, 700s BC, way before Babylon is destroyed, you have the Septuagint, which has those prophecies in it, okay? And we have pieces of it. We have it in our hands. And you can read those same prophecies there at least 100 years before Babylon is utterly destroyed completely and has no more inhabitants in it, and it's continued to be that way since. That's significant to me. That's a big deal that the critics can't get around. And that's something that we need to be aware of. Because they can make stories about why they don't want to believe the Bible, but you still have bits of evidence like this that are hard for them to work their way around. Now, in the remainder of my discussion, I want to shift gears here, and we're going to take a look at more natural evidences of God or proofs of God. So we're going to go into the scientific side of things, because some of those atheists and agnostics just aren't going to get in a conversation with this. You may get some Muslims, some Hindus who do believe in holy books and things like that to get into a conversation with you on what I've just discussed. But on the other side of this, as we move towards a more secular world, people might not be convinced of those arguments, but they might be convinced of some of the arguments I'm going to make right now. So let's talk, and again, there is a whole gamut of things we could get into today. I'm only going to barely scratch the surface. There's tons of stuff like what I'm going to address today out there, and this stuff just blows your mind when you really start to look at it. So let's talk about the origin of life. And again, I'm not going to get specific about what the evolutionists say, but in essence, what they're saying is that God didn't get it started with a man and a woman, that somehow in the ocean of long ago, there was the elements that can make amino acids chain together to form proteins and get more complex, and lightning could strike the ocean, and that would lead to some sort of life beginning in the oceans that were, before there was life on the earth. That's basically where a lot of them are coming from on the origins of life, those who don't believe in God. Now, let's take that idea for a moment that's how it happened, all right? And I want to read you a quote from chemist Richard Dickerson on that idea that I just threw out there that many evolutionists have on the beginning of life. It is therefore hard to see how polymerization, Dave's not here today, is he? I think he deals with polymers, but it is therefore hard to see how polymerization, what that is, it's the linking together of smaller molecules to form bigger ones. It is therefore hard to see how polymerization could have proceeded in the aqueous, in the water, environment of the primitive ocean, since the presence of water favors depolymerization, breaking up bigger molecules into smaller ones, rather than polymerization. Just think about it. Those of you that take a shower, right? I hope everybody takes a shower, of course. Okay. Where did that come from? Anyway, I do take a shower. There was one, I know what it is. There was a day last week, why am I admitting this to everybody, where I decided I was going to take my shower later in the day because we were on vacation, and I said, I'm going to be in the ocean today, so I'll take a shower later. Okay, maybe that was just popped out of nowhere. Anyway, so it's scary up here sometimes. Okay, so here's the deal. Getting back to where I was here. So, yeah, the shower. So you got a bar of soap in the shower, right? What happens to your bar of soap, gang? It gets smaller and smaller, right? It doesn't become something greater than it is because the water dissolves the soap. Think of that in relation to this idea of stuff becoming more complex by getting together in the water. What happens when you put water on something? What's the whole idea? Throw water on it, to dissipate it. You mix water to dissipate the strength of whatever the other things are. Now let's just let him go with it though, okay? But at least this smart guy is saying, hey, there's a problem with this idea, okay? Water breaks stuff up. It's harder to put stuff together in water, okay? Just take that problem to begin with, and let's talk about some other problems with this. So let's say by chance those things did start to bind together. So what are we talking about binding together? 100 amino acids are out there. 20 of them are used to make life. There's 20 of them that are used to make life out of the 100, okay? So get this. Some of the molecules, you could consider them right-handed amino acids. So let's say out of those 100, certain ones are right-handed and certain ones are left-handed, just like there's right-handed people and left-handed people. But here's the deal. This is interesting. The ones that make life, they are all left-handed. And again, I'm just using that as a reference point for you to relate it to something you know. The ones that make life are all left-handed ones. None of them are right-handed. Now, if you think about this soupy mix in the ocean, and you think about stuff binding together, the stuff that has to bind together all has to be the left-handed ones. It can't be right-handed ones. So that, to me, that's like, well, there's less chance of that happening then. Okay, that's another issue that you run into when you begin to look at this problem that they have. And let me read you a quote by physicist. It's not me talking. These are smarter people than me. Physicist J.D. Burnell acknowledges this. It must be admitted that the explanation that explanation I just gave you that, only left-handed types of amino acids come together to make life, it must be admitted that the explanation still remains one of the most difficult parts of the structural aspects of life to explain. We may never be able to explain it. That all the left-handed ones, a specific type of amino acid, that they have to come together. But if you've got this mix where some are right-handed and some are left-handed, it's difficult to think of only the left ones coming together to form these molecules that become something bigger and better than they were before. Now, you think that's a problem with the theory? Well, let's go further with another problem. Chances are that the amino acids, what are the chances of the amino acids coming together, okay? Imagine a big pile of red and white beans, okay? And let's say there are 100 different beans in this pile. So take your pinto beans, take your garbanzo beans. I can't think of 100 different beans, but just imagine that there's 100 different beans, and about half of them are red and half of them are white, okay? Just think about that for a minute. So you stick a scoop into your pile of beans, okay? And you pull the scoop back. Are you thinking that every time you stick that scoop in there, you're going to get those 20 specific beans that lead to the formation of life? No, you're probably not thinking that that's going to happen. You're probably thinking that you're going to be sticking that scoop in there for eternity to try to only get those specific 20 beans in the same scoop all the time. That's what you got to think about when you think about that soupy mix in the ocean coming together to bring all those amino acids together to make life into what it is today. This is what scientists are saying, not me. I'm getting this from scientists writing about it. Now get this. Evolutionists admit, okay, I'm saying this is not going to happen. Here's what they say. Evolutionists admit the chances of even simple protein molecules forming at random, which is what evolutionary theory is based on, okay? That's why it's called a theory, folks, okay? That's why I'll call it a faith, okay? And some of them call it a faith. Here, let me get back to the stats. Evolutionists admit chances of even simple protein molecules forming at random are 1 in 10 to the 113th power. That's a 10 with 113 zeros after it. That's a pretty big number. But here's what mathematicians tell you about probability. Mathematicians say if something has a 1 in 10 to the 50 chance, it's never going to happen. You get what I'm saying? But what they're saying is what they believe in is something that has a more minuscule chance of happening than something never happening. You get what I'm saying here? This isn't going to happen, folks. Yet they believe that this is how it all came together, at least some of them. And some of them say, well, we can't worry about these details. It did happen. It did happen, okay? And I say, well, wait a minute. You don't want to get into a conversation with me about my faith in this God of the Bible, but you believe this? It's freaky. It's freaky when you think about it and read this stuff. Now let me get into, let's say that did happen though, okay? Let's just try to be nice in this argument. And let's say that they got life. And we get to cells now, the cells in your body. And let's talk a little bit in the remaining time about the cells in your body. And you all know now that the cells in your body make you who you are, give you the eye color that you have, give you the height and weight that you have because of information in those cells that comes from DNA, right? Everybody's aware of that stuff now, right? We know about DNA, that's an instruction code, it's in your cells, but did you know Just want you to get this for a minute. And again, I forget this stuff, and when I go back and read it again, I'm just like, how do you not believe there's a God? Okay? So get this. According to National Geographic magazine, if you wrote out all the information that DNA has within it, within one cell in your body, if you wrote it out in books, it would come to fill 1,600-page books. Just think about that for a minute. The information that DNA provides for your cell to do what it does would fill 1,600-page books. Now, if you think of 600 books just in general, and you think of how small a cell is, to hold all that coded information, you're shaking your head, right? Because what is information? Doesn't information have an intent? You know, I teach classes for work, and when I get up to teach class, I hopefully have prepared for what I'm going to do. I don't just get up there and say, okay, let's do this and see what happens, right? I've got an intention when I go to teach a class. Your cells have an intentionality based on the information inside of them. Think about how small the cell is and how much information is there. And the fact that there's an intentionality whenever you're dealing with information. And tell me there's not a God. You know, before DNA was discovered and we got all these kinds of details, evolutionary theory had begun. Darwin had thought of the things he thought of. And I get where Darwin was coming from. You know, you can get the idea of adaptation and things like that. But to make the leap into species changing into other species, that's going too far. But I doubt even Darwin, if he knew about DNA, I doubt that he would have gone in that direction that he went. Because the ideas and the information about DNA has come after these ideas about evolution began. If you just take the 46 chromosome threads in your cells and link them together, if you link them all together, it comes out to 6 feet. 6 feet long. Again, folks, smush that all together and put it into your cell, which you can't see. But if you didn't know how big a cell is, that 6 feet of chromosome threading is within a nucleus in your cell that is less than 4/10,000ths of an inch in diameter. So how do you get 6 feet of data to be made so small that it fits into something that is 4/1000ths of an inch in diameter? That just happened by chance? Think about it, man. Does that blow your mind? That's like, come on. You know, look at a watch, and I can get like how somebody made a watch, right? Got this thing turning here, and that's doing this, and somebody thought that up and did it. DNA blows that away by millions and billions. You get what I'm saying? And you're telling me that it came together by chance? It just doesn't make any sense, folks. It doesn't make any sense. Each cell in your body is like a little city. It's like a little city. Let me tell you about this. It's like a little city from this standpoint. You have power plants in all those cells that are generating energy for the cell. And you're saying, there's not a power plant in the cell. Yeah, I get that, okay? But you could say that this part of a cell is like a power plant because it actually generates energy for the cell. Another thing within your cell, and this is on, you can go on YouTube and you can look some of this stuff up. They got little pictures of what it looks like in your cell. And they had like this little picture, it seemed like the Michelin Man, and he was like walking like a balloon would walk. Maybe if you saw Ghostbusters, you remember that big balloon that came at the end? The funny-looking guy. I forget that. I just have it in my head right now anyway. So I told you it's crazy up here. So there's a video on YouTube where you can see that it looks like this little balloon-shaped thing is carrying something from one part of the cell and drops it off there. And it goes back to where it was, like a little man walking in this cell, dropping off things. And when you see it, it blows your mind, because you can't see it. You know, it's so small you can't even imagine that it's real. You know, but in the world, there are all these amazing things we can't even see that are happening. But there's amazing things we can see that are happening, like those trees out there, photosynthesis, and how all that happens. And I'm not going to get into that because I don't have time, but that'll blow your mind too. But getting back to the cell, these transportation systems move chemicals back and forth within the cell. There are little guards within your cell. These guards are set at certain barricades within the cell, and they control what comes into the cell and what leaves the cell. Just like a security guard standing at the door saying, okay, you can come in, and okay, you can go out. There's something that does that in your cell, just like in the real human world, okay? Another thing within your cell, and you guys have probably heard of this one more, there are little armies of soldiers in there, right? When you get a disease in your body, what happens? Your body goes against it. It fights against these invaders, just like armies battling each other. As soon as they know there's an invasion in that cell, these guys go to work. Sometimes they don't win the battle, you know, and we get sick. But they often do win the battle. And you say to yourself, this all started in a soupy mix in the ocean? This complexity within the cell? It's just like, it's hard to believe that some people, even these intelligent people who know this stuff, who are teaching us this stuff, they still believe there's not a God. Now, some of them do believe in God, okay? There's some who are writing books now, physicists, chemists, who are saying, you know what? I can't believe that there's not a God anymore, because of what I'm learning, the more and more we're learning about the complexity of our very own bodies and cells. So it's just amazing when you begin to look at this stuff and study this stuff. It just totally blows your mind. Two final quotes I want to read, and then I want to conclude with a couple scriptures here. The hypothesis that life has developed from inorganic matter is at present, see, he's hedging his bet. He's hoping they're going to find something that's going to say, oh yeah, there is no God. Okay, we can prove this now. Is at present still an article of faith. Evolutionary theory, folks, whatever people tell you out there in your colleges that some of our young people are going to, some schools some of our younger people are going to right now to begin this semester, regardless of what those teachers are telling them, this mathematician, J.W.N. Sullivan, says it still takes faith to believe that it all started in a soupy mix long ago. It takes a lot of faith, actually, in my mind. Another quote, an honest man, armed with all the knowledge available to us now, could only state that in some sense the origin of life appears at the moment, and once again they're hedging their bets, they don't want to believe it, appears at the moment to be, get this, almost a miracle, he says. Why? Because it's so hard for them to believe that there's a God, because they don't want to believe it. They don't want to believe it, because when you believe there's a God, you got to answer to that God. And there's a lot to answer to. There's a lot we're held accountable for in this book. And they know that. And that's why they say almost, okay? And maybe. But what, you know who said this? Francis Crick. Anybody know who Francis Crick? That name ring a bell? He was one of the guys who figured out the stuff about DNA. He was one of the guys, one of the biologists who started to see all this DNA stuff and give us all this information. And what's he saying? He's pretty blown away by it too, okay? And he's not there, but he says life appears to be almost a miracle, okay? We got him that far, okay? But to me, it is a miracle. It is a miracle, and it is a proof of God. And I believe of the God of this Bible, because once you start to study the other religions, folks, they are wanting. They are left wanting in many areas. In many areas. Turn to Romans 1 and verse 20. Romans 1 and verse 20. And remember, this was written a couple thousand years ago. They didn't know about DNA at this time, okay? Okay? Romans 1:20. But what did they know about, folks? Romans 1:20. Let me read it to you. Romans 1:20. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Now, 2,000 years ago, folks, we didn't know about DNA. What did they know about? Think about the writer and people getting this 2,000 years ago. The things that are made. What would they be looking at? They couldn't see things under a microscope. They just looked outside, folks, and do it today. Look at the trees as you drive down the road and realize the tree came from a seed about this big. That huge 50-foot tree out there, that tree that is bearing apples or oranges, wherever it may be, came from this little seed, just like the DNA in your body has all that information that you can't see. That little seed had all the information to tell that seed with water and photosynthesis, you become this, and you become that, and you bear this fruit, and you bear that fruit. That's a miracle in itself, and it's right in front of people. And it's been in front of people since the beginning of time that people have been here on the earth. When people who didn't know about DNA looked up into space, and they saw all those lights in space and all those stars, they had to say to themselves, wow, how far away is that? And how did that get up there? And why can't I get there? They had to say somebody put that there, right? Think about them back then. When they looked at their kids being born, or when they looked at other people, they had to say, wow, that person's different than me. They have different eye color or slightly different or whatever's going on with them. And they said to themselves, wow, something created this. Something did this, because everywhere they looked, life came from something else. Life came from other life. And no matter how far back you go, folks, you're going to get to a point looking at life coming from other life where it had to start, okay? And you can believe that it started in a soupy mix, or you can believe in God, folks. And I will leave you with Psalm 14:1. I'm not going to tell you what decision to make, but let me just give you some advice here. Psalm 14 and verse 1. Psalm 14 and verse 1. The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. Folks, don't be the fool.